Peter Pollack. Is that
Susie.
Susan Cassidy?
That's Susie, right?
Is Peter Pollack? Is that Peter?
I don't think so.
Roger Crone, Gary Blood. Lustonen.
Here's Sarah. Yeah.
Dan Pollack. But that's all.
Hello, everybody.
They're all at the house.
Sharon and Stan.
Before we begin, there's so many people joining us. I'm going to be monitoring that process.
Oh,
So if I seem distracted, it's because I'm including everybody I can. I'd like to just check in with Adira. Adira, do you see that I made you co-host? And if there's any difficulty with sharing, then I'm actually going to make you the host. And like because that'll give you full powers. And then when things are appropriate, I would ask you to return the favor to me. But we'll start by co-hosting and seeing if that's possible. I'm going to also going to make some more family members co-hosts because in that way, I'll always have them at the top of the screen. I might let's wait 2 or 3 minutes more because sometimes it takes people a chance to look in their email and find the link and click through. Sometimes we think we have it and we don't. So I just want to make sure that's possible. People are joining. I'm just watching the numbers go up as I stand here. Actually, Adira?
Yeah.
While I admit people, why don't I turn things over to you to set the mood for this service?
Thank you.
לכל זמן, ועת לכל חפץ תחת השמיים, עת ללדת ועת למות, עת לטעת ולקור נטוע, עת להרוג ועת לרפוא, עת לפרוץ ועת לבנות, עת לבכות ועת לצחוק, עת צפות ועת ריקות. Ecclesiastes says, this time is set for everything, the time for every experience under heaven, the time for being born and a time for dying, the time for planting and a time for uprooting, a time for slaying and a time for healing, a time for tearing down and a time for building up, a time for weeping and a time for laughter, a time for wailing and a time for dancing, a time for throwing stones, a time for gathering them up, a time for embracing, a time for turning away, a time for seeking and a time for losing, a time for ripping and a time for sowing, a time for silence and a time for speaking. We're here today at this memorial service with all this wonderful group. I'm looking at the numbers as they go up and up. Celebrate the life of Erwin Pollack, Yitzchak ben Benjamin Vemalka. Our condolences go out to the family, and I'm only going to name some of them because it extends and extends, but our condolences, of course, to you, Marcel, to Sharon, to Phyllis, and to Stan, to Dave, Sarah, Seth, Adira, and Ben, and to great-grandson Paxton, along with all of those, the extended family connected through marriage, and closeness and friendship. The Jewish service is simple. It's a time for speaking rather than for a time for silence. We focus on the words of those who are paying tribute. We're going to begin with Sharon. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Already, hopefully I'm unmuted now.
You are.
Okay, so I'm Sharon, my parents' firstborn. And as such, I often have taken the path of responsibility and duty. So I'll start by giving you a sense of my father's background. My dad, like most Ashkenazi Jews from Eastern Europe, had parents from humble beginnings who immigrated in the early 20th century on their own from their large families on pogroms in Russia. Both of them worked in the garment industry in New York City, and after marrying, moved to Bridgeport, Connecticut, where they had a dress shop. My dad was born there, but around the time of his bar mitzvah, he developed scarlet fever. This morphed into rheumatic fever, so the family moved to Miami Beach, hoping the weather there would provide him with some protection from further illness. Like many immigrant families, they put an enormous emphasis on education. Though my father started in chemical engineering when he first went to college, he ended up in the very analytical and challenging field of psychoacoustics. There was a charismatic psychology professor at the University of Florida who piqued his interest in psychology, and he went on to study auditory and visual perception as a doctoral student at Harvard University, where his primary mentor was Nobel laureate George von Bekeschi. Initially, my father worked as a civilian scientist in the Air Force labs in Washington, D.C., and later Bedford, Massachusetts. When the labs disbanded, he was offered positions in private industry, like Bell Labs and IBM, but they were unwilling to provide him with health insurance because of his damaged heart. Universities, however, saw things differently. The University of Michigan said they wanted to hire him for his brain, not his heart, and offered him a joint appointment as professor of psychology and a researcher at Mental Health Research Institute with insurance. He gladly accepted. Much of what my dad did was very technical and only fully understood by his fellow researchers. But he also took his knowledge to some applied fields. Like when JFK Airport in New York was expanding, he was called in to study the effects of noise on potential flight patterns. He spent a summer at Bell Labs working on speech recognition, something we now take for granted. Later, he was brought in by the Bureau of Standards to figure out auditory range implications so the makers of CDs would know how much information to include on their products. My father had a voracious appetite for learning, and he cast a wide net beyond the sciences. He had a genuine interest, a genuine interest and passion for art. So when he was not in his research labs, our family spent many hours at the National Art Gallery in Washington, D.C. Although I didn't inherit my father's scientific and analytical genes, I was heavily influenced by going to art museums and lingering in front of artwork with my dad, developing a deep appreciation for visual images. There were Modigliani, Renoir, and Rembrandt reproductions on the walls of our apartment. My parents nurtured this interest in me, and I'm grateful they were accepting of this less traditional field I chose to major in. But like my dad, I too became a professor and enjoyed teaching and working with students. My particular discipline is printmaking, which is a medium very dependent on problem solving, experimenting, and researching. So in my own way, I followed in my dad's footsteps. I recall the great joy we had as a family when years later we returned to Washington, D.C. to see the cherry blossoms and also had the opportunity to go to the National Gallery of Art print study room and personally examine Durer and Rembrandt prints at a very close range. Because of the robust congregation I am involved with in St. Louis, I've developed a deeper sense of my Jewish connectedness and a better understanding of my father's lifelong relationship to Judaism. I remember when his father died, my dad would go to his synagogue every morning and join the minyan to say Kaddish before going to work. Often when I was in Ann Arbor, I would go with him to Beth Israel services. Even in his waning years, he sang Odon Olam with spirited vigor. My mother would joke that he was going to services just to enjoy the oneg at the end, where he could eat food he wouldn't otherwise get at home. But I can say from sitting near him that he felt a deep spiritual connection through his faith. In recent months, he and I have joined in Beth Israel Zoom services together. And I want to say, as a family, we have a deep appreciation for the ways the Beth Israel congregation have supported my parents over the years during their various health issues. My parents had a conventional marriage for their time. My dad worked very hard to support our family financially, and my mother took care of the home front and was our primary caregiver. However, when my mother got transverse myelitis, my father became her sole caregiver for many years. We pleaded with them to get assistance in the home, but it was only in the last few years they eventually drew upon that help. My siblings and I think my father, despite his failing heart, willed himself to live longer in order to care for our mother. With a great sense of reciprocity, my dad was devoted for caring for my mom as she had once been devoted to caring for him and our family. My dad was a treasure of a father. We will deeply miss his robust, loving presence in our family. Thank you.
Okay, very nice. Here's your phone.
Thank you, Sharon. We now turn to Phyllis.
You all set, Stan? Good morning, friends and family, and thank you for joining us. I'm Phyllis, the middle child, mother of David and Sarah, proud mother. My father had a large heart, literally and figuratively, and an equally large intellect. Due to his heart condition as a child, he embraced life and learning early on and was on the fast track in his career, getting his PhD from Harvard at 24 and full professorship at Michigan at 38. I suspect that Dad's heart condition somehow influenced my decision to go into pediatric cardiology. His first heart valve replacement was in 1980 at 55 years of age. He came to Boston where I was training because there was a nursing strike at U of M. He then had a second valve at 80 years of age. And fortunately, over the years, he really did not suffer until his final days, when hospice care brought a peaceful death. We thank his physicians and Arbor Hospice for their attentive care and support. His final wish was to donate his implanted defibrillator to charity to be repurposed in third world countries. He was always giving of himself. As with many first generation Jewish Americans, Dad made education our top priority, as you have heard. He generously encouraged, guided, and supported us through college, then graduate school for sister, law school for my brother, medical school for me, and many of his grandchildren. He set the bar high, and even an MD degree from Harvard Medical School fell short of his expectation for an MD PhD. But alas, I did not inherit the research gene. We had plenty of fun times too. Where's oh yeah. One of the great joys of growing up in Ann Arbor was the array of Michigan sports events that we attended together. Gymnastics and wrestling matches, swim meets, all men's, of course, before Title IX. For decades, Dad never missed a football game in the big house with enviable seats on the 50-yard line. He especially enjoyed the fifth quarter when the Michigan marching band would put on their post-game show. We were obsessed with Michigan basketball as well. And one memorable Passover, we were back in town when Michigan's Fab Five played in the NCAA Final Four, and we all went together to Chrysler Arena to watch the game on the Jumbotron and again enjoy the band and cheerleaders. Sadly, this past year, we were not able to celebrate our annual ritual of Pollack Passovers at my parents' home in Ann Arbor with their ever-expanding family. Instead, we celebrated with a Zoom Seder together, followed by dessert with a Zoom celebration of my dad's 95th birthday on that very evening. In fact, during cruel COVID, Dad did not leave the house for months and avoided all clinic visits until his health failed in late October. Ironically, just hours after Dad's passing, an invitation came through to schedule him for his COVID vaccine. In his final act of posthumous generosity, one more person will benefit, Dianu. My father's legacy of learning and loving will live in our hearts forever. For all of his life's lessons, we thank you, Daddy, from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you.
Okay, how do you pull up the screen?
Oh, I'll get it for you, yeah. Where's the bus? There you go. And you can do this here. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Phyllis. We welcome Stanley.
Here's his prop.
Shalom, I'm Stanley, the baby of the family. My father's mother, Mary, always stressed the importance to us of togetherness for our family. And my sisters and I concur that the seminal event that cemented the togetherness of our family was the 15 months we spent together in Europe when my father was a research scientist on a Fulbright fellowship in Cambridge, England. This is around 1960 to 1961. We spent the school year in Fulbourn, a very small town outside of Cambridge. And although our school was tiny, we received an excellent education. And when my sisters and I returned to the United States, we found ourselves far ahead of our American classmates we had left behind. Getting the best education available was always a guiding principle for our father. When we weren't in school, we used every opportunity to explore the wonders of Europe. The 5 of us camped across Europe together in our little Volkswagen minibus equipped for campers. Didn't have all these stickers, but we were hippies ahead of our time, running around Europe and camping everywhere. We even camped in downtown Paris in a campground in the middle of the city where we would take the metro to explore the city and see such sights as the Louvre and Notre Dame. Our travels took us as far north as the fjords of Norway and as far east and south as the state of Israel, where we camped by the Mediterranean and Red Seas. We witnessed the Independence Day parade, marking the 13th anniversary of the creation of the state of Israel. This was all during a break in the trial of Adolf Eichmann. Our travels took us to the heights of the Swiss Alps and the lows of the death camp at Dachau. My 36-year-old father was our tour guide, our protector, our inspiration. After almost a year and a half of travel through more than a dozen countries, we returned to the United States, but only after another great adventure, a week-long crossing of the Atlantic with our beloved VW van in the hold of the SS Liberty, the ship. And we had only a minimum of seasickness on that trip. Our earliest travels as a family also included a coast-to-coast drive from Washington, D.C. to California around 1958 in our old Buick. My father, ever the psychologist, constructed a platform in the back for me and my sisters to play on. And when we misbehaved, the platform folded into 3 partitions so that my parents could get their needed quiet time from us. We regularly drove down to Miami Beach, where our parents grew up, to visit our beloved grandparents. On my last major road trip with my father in December of 1984, he and my mother drove to Miami Beach, where my father and I slept on my grandmother's balcony, overlooking the ocean, breathing the salty air and the gentle breezes and the murmurs of the ocean lulling us to sleep. In his final days, my father struggled to find the air to breathe and the comfort to find restful sleep. Sharon set the app on our father's cell phone to play the sounds of the ocean surf so that he might get his much needed rest. It is little wonder that with all the traveling we did together as a family, my sisters and I would be inspired to seek travels of our own. We will always, always be grateful. And we will always be grateful for my father's selflessness. When I think of a word that best describes my father, I think of selfless. Above all the amazing qualities of my father, his selflessness always stood out. Everything my father did was for the betterment of his family, always putting our needs above his own. My father was a child of the Great Depression, and he carefully saved his earnings so that his children and grandchildren could have educations that his own parents were unable to have. My sisters and I were fortunate to earn graduate degrees while being supported by our loving father. You heard from Sharon how she was inspired to go into art by our father's love of art, and Phyllis became a doctor inspired by my father's brilliance as a scientist. In my case, it was my father's example of selflessness that made me become a lawyer devoted to social justice. My father's devotion to my mother was without limits, often putting aside his own health concerns to comfort her in her declining health. When my father was still capable of walking on his own, he would arise at dawn to sit by my mother's bed in order to be with her when she would wake up and provide comfort to her when she was in pain. Whenever I asked, "What could I do for you?" my father would simply tell me to take care of our mother. For his birthday, I recall asking him where he wanted to eat, and he would simply say, "Wherever your mother wants to eat." Despite the highly specialized nature of my father's research, he was extremely curious and was incredibly well-versed in the world around him. He was socially gregarious, and my friends loved to talk with my father because no matter what their interests were, he was always able to engage them and make them feel special. And despite my father's amazing intellect, the smartest man I ever knew, he rarely talked about his own work or about himself. Our father was always too concerned about our well-being to express concerns about his own. Consequently, it is odd to me now that I find myself guessing to fill in some of the pieces of my father's life that remain unknown. Just yesterday, in preparation for this event, I asked my sister what our father's favorite color was. Sharon said, "I don't really know." Again, I asked, and this time I said, "The answer is obvious." Again, she said she didn't know. Finally, I said, "The answer is ask your mother what her favorite color is." Thank you to my father for giving our family such an amazing, wonderful life together. And thank you too to my sisters for your love, your devotion, your care for my father always, especially in his final days.
Thank you, Stanley. I think I speak on behalf of many of the 78 screens that are here and many more people when I say that it's very comforting to see a very strong resemblance between your father and your own face in the screen. We now turn to Joe.
Mensch. The word trips easily, too easily perhaps, off one's tongue, since there are pretenders and the real thing. My father-in-law, Irv Pollack, was unquestionably the real thing. Among my many formative interactions with him over more than 4 decades, I've culled out just one to talk about today. It occurred the evening Sharon and I told Irvin Marcille we intended to get married. Since the two of us had been in an exclusive relationship for more than 2 years, our news could hardly have come as a shock. But there were reasons for Sharon's parents to have been less than utterly delighted by their daughter's choice of a mate. Although I was by then an advanced assistant professor with a budding national reputation in my field and certain tenure on the immediate horizon, I had also been divorced. And while I was no longer a practicing Catholic, 16 of my 21 years of formal education had been in Catholic schools. Notwithstanding these potential drawbacks, Sharon's parents, as we'd anticipated, greeted our announcement with a display of genuine welcoming and affection. Later that evening, however, Irv quietly took me aside for a Jewish version of what these days we think of in popular culture as the talk. He said he hoped our union would produce children and that we would raise them Jewish. Sharon and I had, of course, talked about this issue extensively between ourselves over time. That's what we were going to do, but Irv had no positive way of knowing that. So then, and this is the important part, he spoke 2 more sentences that I still recall verbatim. There are so few of us left in the world, he said. It's a heritage I've always wanted to be passed on. What I immediately recognized as a poignant lament impacted me deeply. Religion and tradition are obviously among life's most powerful forces. But this was more than that. This was internalized pain speaking. It took me days to really process what he'd said. But once I did understand it, change began to stir in me. I started auditing university courses in Jewish history and culture and doing more reading. I was blessed to have access to a rabbi who was amazing to work with. And I eventually prepared for and underwent conversion so that we could, in a fuller sense, live as a Jewish family, especially after we began having children. While the exchange I've just described was by no means the only time I benefited from Irv's kindness and wisdom, it was a rare, transformative moment that only deepened in me that only deepened in me the meaning of family, but also led to the generation of children, 2 of whom you'll hear from later, who have also been profoundly impacted by their grandfather's wisdom, as has their older brother, who is also present on this Zoom. Let me conclude with a few relevant words from a poem that Michigan native and longtime U of M professor Robert Hayden penned several decades ago in a very different context, but which has relevance for today. Quoting Hayden, "This man shall be remembered not with rhetoric and wreaths, but with the lives grown out of his life. Remembered with the lives grown out of his life." Which is to say that despite his physical passing, Irv's life stands as a vibrant gift that remains alive and capable of growing within us now and into the future. May we all continue to be blessed by our association with this truly good man.
Zichrono livracha. His memory is a blessing. It's my honor at this time to turn things over to my co-host, Adira, and ask her perhaps to introduce what she's about to present to us.
Hello, everybody. So we are going to share a video that we put together of an amazing treasure trove of photos that we have of Grandpa over the years. And there are many that we did not include. We have a lot of photographers in our family, but this is just a little treat, and I hope you enjoy.
Happy New Year from Ann Arbor. May 2021 be a joyous, happy, healthy New Year for y'all. We love y'all.
I hope that gives you, I know that everyone knew my grandfather, how brilliant he was intellectually, but just seeing his smile and how much he adored his family has brought us a lot of smiles needed smiles in this really sad time.
Thank you so much, Adira. Thank you so very much. We're going to move at the moment to Dave, and we look forward to hearing your words.
Thank you, Rabbi. And for those that don't know, I'm Erwin Pollack's grandson, eldest grandson, and eldest son of Phyllis Pollack. No number nor degree of superlative is enough to describe the incomparable Erwin Pollack. We'll miss him so dearly, particularly after he gave us so much. Beyond all of the support he gave us, what I'll always remember most was his insatiable desire for knowledge and understanding. It's very likely that I owe much of my analytical approach, my love for games, to Grandpa, but it's his love of learning that will always endure. I still remember excitedly learning chess from him. He didn't care that I was young. He just wanted me to learn. If my foggy recollection holds, I was seated on the floor of a kitchen interacting with the board. I was probably only 4 or 5 years old, but I still remember him being incredibly patient with his highly distractible and forgetful apprentice. On our annual pilgrimages back to Ann Arbor for Passover, we'd sometimes break out the Scrabble board. "Aw, gee, that's not a word." But we'd often return to chess too. I'm proud to say that it stopped being competitive at some point, but he was humbled by the role reversal and remained inquisitive about my play. Later in life, his thirst for learning was directed at understanding various companies' business models. Anything hot in the stock market, sure, but particularly the companies his grandchildren started working at. For example, while consulting after business school, he persistently inquired about really how much value a bunch of smart know-nothings could add. The answer was, not a lot. Grandpa was always on to something. While at Medidata Solutions, a clinical trial software company, he repeatedly inquired about how differentiated we were from our competitors. The answer, of course, was not a lot. Grandpa, of course, was always on to something. While at a startup afterward, we mined scientific literature for drug development insights. He repeatedly inquired how much we could really and actually help spark new drug development. The answer was not a lot. Grandpa, as has always been clear from his incisive wit and curious disposition, was always onto something. Grandpa kept voraciously learning, and he stuck with us for so long that I deluded myself into thinking that he and Grandma were invulnerable. Everyone has their time to physically go, but Grandpa's passion for learning will endure through all future generations. Even 3 generations in, I see it with our son on a daily basis. Erwin leaves a tremendous legacy, not least because of his lifelong passion for learning. We'll miss you so much, Grandpa.
Thank you so much for those words. We turn to Sarah.
Good morning. I am Sarah Krisoff. I'm Phyllis's daughter, Dave's younger sister, and this is my husband, Austin Krisoff. My earliest memories with Grandpa are his big bear hugs. Bear hugs are special for any grandchild, but our bear hugs always came with an extra squeeze from Grandpa's pacemaker over his chest. As a young girl, I was in complete awe of my superhuman grandfather. I mean, he had a small computer chip in his chest years before most people had one in their homes. The way I understood it at the time, his heart couldn't ever stop ticking. He was completely invincible and would always be there for all of us. Fast forward a couple decades after pursuing my own career into healthcare, my awe for his heart grew beyond his high-tech pacemaker. He was devoted and steadfast, patient and a gentle grandpa, father, and husband. He was always there for us, but really he was always there for Grandma. I recall calling their home phone, and every time my grandpa picked up first, since he was a bit more mobile. I could hardly ask him how he was before he'd put the phone down and say, "Let me go get Grandma." he would hand her that phone and then run to another part of the house just in time to pick up his own line and listen in. She always came first. He was there to help her open, close, cut and serve, pick, clean, and cook. One of his routines involved taking out their pillboxes every night. And I can remember it so clearly after so many Passover Seders. As a nurse practitioner now, I've seen a lot of nurses in my day. He cared for grandma better than most nurses with years of training care for their patients. That same childlike wonder and awe about his heart, both its physical and emotional strength and loyalty, will always stay with all of us. We're so grateful for that dedication that he showed to grandma for nearly 72 years. For that, I thought about what grandma might say today. I'd like to share a brief poem by Rabbi Simcha King as if it were Grandma Marciel's words. I think Adira is going to show the poem for you to read along. When my loved one is taken from me, shall I mourn? When my dear one departs forever, shall I wail and rend my flesh as I do my garment? No, that is not the way. I may find the road ahead lonely. I may dread tomorrow without that voice, without that smile. I may not know whence will come the courage to continue, yet I shall not despair. I shall praise God who gave me my beloved. I shall sing unto God who enables us to love. I shall voice thanks for what I have had. I will refuse to become bitter over what I shall lack. When my loved one leaves me, I shall indeed shed tears. Yet even then, I shall utter a hymn, a song for joy for what has been. Baruch atah Adonai, praised are you, O God. You have allowed me to know love. You have granted me an eternal treasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Adira, we turn to you once again.
Hello, everybody. I am Adira Waxelman. I'm the daughter of Sharon Pollack, Erwin's oldest daughter, and Joe Waxelman. My older brother, Seth Waxelman, is also in attendance, and you'll hear from my twin brother, Ben, next. And I also want to introduce my fiance, Tyler Brown, is also joining from another computer screen. Grandpa, you were without question the smartest, most selfless, and generous person I have ever met. You'd be the last to advertise this, but you graduated with a PhD from Harvard at, I think it was 23. It seems like there's a little bit of debate. A true phenom. Shortly after, you married Grandma and spent 71 years being the most caring husband. You raised 3 amazing children, all while being a dedicated educator and researcher. Your constant curiosity and zest for learning never ceased, yet you were always so dutiful to your family. You and Grandma traveled all 50 states and countless countries around the world, even moving your young family to England for a time before settling in your beloved Ann Arbor. You supported every part of my education and always wanted to know what I was learning in school and in the workforce. You encouraged me to follow my passions career-wise and personally. When I announced my desire to move from the Midwest to California, you didn't try to convince me to stay. Instead, you said, I hope you find what you're looking for. Once I had moved, when you spoke of another gray Michigan day, I loved sending you California sun to remind you of your Florida upbringing. For all your support, I'm so grateful. One of the few good things that come out of COVID is at 95 years young, you learned how to use Zoom, and we got to video chat with you nearly every Saturday morning for the past 11 months. I'll miss your Facebook and Instagram comments too. You definitely get the award for the most tech-savvy great-grandpa. Because of heart issues, doctors told you that you'd barely live until your 50s, but you lived until 95, almost twice as long. If the doctors were right, I never would have met you. Instead, I got 32 whole years with you. You were such a fighter, so much so so much so that I thought he might be invincible and this day would never come. Unfortunately, we all have to say goodbye at some point. I'm getting married in 5 months, and although I'm devastated you won't be there to see it, I take solace in the fact that thanks to FaceTime, you got to give your input when I tried on wedding dresses. Good news, I chose your favorite one. I promise to always take care of Tyler, just as you have cared for Grandma all these years. You were the ultimate patriarch of Ann Arbor's original Fab Five. You were the epitome of a life well lived. I felt your constant love and support from childhood to adulthood. Our whole family has, and I always will have it with me forever and always. I miss you so much already. Much, much love, Grandpa.
Thank you so much, Adira. And now we do turn to Ben.
Hi, everyone. Yes, Ben Wexelman, the youngest of the grandkids. And this is my wonderful wife, Brittany. So I guess I'll start with the obvious fact that I'm named after Grandpa's father. And so from the very beginning, he and I felt like we had a very tight bond. And it will last with me forever. And so as I think about memories of Grandpa, and many others have touched on the fact that he was a voracious learner. We were at an open house, I believe it was in high school, and I remember him going up to all of my teachers, talking about what was in the curriculum, what was on the tests, and, why should he care? Most folks just want to walk through the open house and get on with their lives, but he was so fascinated in terms of what we were up to and just wanted to be so involved. The next memory, and many of you on the line will appreciate this, and Adira alluded to it, is the Instagram and Facebook comments. I mean, a 95-year-old with the tech savviness that he had, a happy birthday, a happy Mother's Day, potentially even on his own Facebook page instead of, the intended recipient. But he cared so much about other people. As Stanley alluded to, the selflessness was just incredible. In more recent years, my family had put in cameras in my grandparents' home. And from time to time in the evenings, as my grandpa would watch on TV, I would look to see what he was watching, oftentimes a sporting event, sometimes his beloved Jeopardy. And I always found myself turning to the same game so he and I could feel like we were watching it together. Made it feel as though we were very close. And then the last memory I have, for the last several years, in fact, he and I spoke on the phone every single week. It was something that mattered a lot to me, so I prioritized it. I would call him every week, oftentimes more than once, to check and see how things were going and how Grandma was. And, he would say the same thing. Oh, nothing here, same as always. But just having that connection with him means so much to me. And, I didn't necessarily view him as Grandpa. I viewed him as a dear friend. And I know I'll really miss those chats. So appreciate it, and thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's good to see you again. I remember you being here in the sanctuary with me, and it's such a pleasure to see you in your Talit and connected to the sanctuary that we're in. Just a few words on behalf of Torah at this time. Our tradition holds it as a holy thing where the Torah is rolled to when someone's soul passes through those words into the next world. It's a very interesting time where Erwin's soul made that transition. surrounded by loved ones. We were in synagogue just moments later as he was in those final hours, reading a section of Torah that starts with talking about how one man's heart becomes hardened. Now, the actual term is that Pharaoh's heart, the king's heart, is strengthened. And it's only a bad thing because it's Pharaoh. We don't need evil people being strengthened in their resolve. But the actual Hebrew term doesn't mean the hardening of the heart. It means that one's heart is strengthened, it grows stronger, and one's resoluteness increases. I think of all of the times that Erwin must have made that 4+ mile journey to and from work, from the home that we get to see on the screen, and each time strengthening his heart to defy the decree that was made at the time of his bar mitzvah. And in so many ways, not only strengthening his resolve, his determination, and his resoluteness, as the Hebrew term, the biblical term means, but also the size of his heart, the size of his compassion, as we heard. The very next section is all about the Passover Seder. It's all about the beauty of the Seder that you're going to keep. From the children asking questions and telling them all kinds of things and referring to the heritage of our people and its oppression and our freedom, to all of the little pieces of all the little pieces of the Seder, from Maror to everything else. And I think of all the pictures we got to see, the importance of Erwin leading that Seder, those words being read in the Torah as he's lying there surrounded by loved ones. And as we come to the end of the parsha, we're then turned and we have it set up for the following lines for the afternoon reading, right in the transition, where Erwin's soul decided to transition out of this world. And those words are very interesting. They say, the first part is that we're transitioning into the Shabbat of song, which will be next Shabbat. And Shabbat, I think of Erwin going out in the world, psychoacoustics, heading out into the world of sound and into the world, as the Israelites are about to do, of hearing God's voice for the first time, whatever that means psychoacoustically. I imagine Erwin would have had a better critical thought about that than my theological training. And as the Israelites prepare to go forth, they're in a great hurry, right? Their matzah doesn't even have time to rise. There's no time to lose. But then, after this, they leave Egypt, God says in the very first words of the parsha where he was at, it says, you'll think, God says, that you're going by the short route, but you are going to be going, Israelites, by the long route. We see in Erwin's life how he was in such a hurry, right? No time to lose. That sense of impending mortality, no time to lose to get degrees and more degrees and to publish papers and more papers and to help and to heal and to do more and more and more. And yet, look, his journey ended up being beyond 40 years, over 50 years at Beth Israel congregation alone, over 60 years of marriage. And in the long way, he learned, I think, from what I hear, to slow down. And that was a journey of covenant. And on behalf of Torah, I witnessed to Erwin's tremendous commitment to covenant. Covenant with the Jewish people, where we come from, and they must continue. Covenant with the Torah itself, always being here in the sanctuary to listen, to connect with Torah. I have to tell you that his seat, which is right over there, it was weird when I came in. The sanctuary has been empty since last March, except for me. And so, I can put down my watch over here and my bag over there. No one's going to be here. So when I look over at Erwin's chair, it has the cloth, the white cloth from High Holy Days from the Torah table. And I don't know why, but when I folded it up afterward, I put it on his chair, and it's right over there, like the white burial shroud of traditional Judaism. Torah also means education. We, the people, have a covenant with education. We change the field, and we allow education to change us. his covenant with family, of which we heard so much, center of his life, and his covenant in marriage, his devotion to Marcille, his being taken care of, and his taking care. That is the essence of covenant. May the soul of Yitzchak, Ben Benjamin V'Malka, rest in peace. The Lord is my shepherd, I want nothing. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my spirit. He guides me in straight paths for his name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear nothing, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies, and you have anointed my head with oil, and my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. El male rachamim, shochen ba'amromim, hamtze menucha nechonha, tachat kanfei hashchina, b'ma'alot kedoshim u'tehorim, kezohar harakia, mazhirim, v'nishmat Yitzchak, Ben Benjamin V'Malka, shehalach le'olamo, b'gan Eden, tehei menuchato, Ana Baal harachamim, astirehu b'seter kenafecha le'olamim, utzrohor b'tzror hachayim, et nishmato, Adonai hu nachlato, v'yanuach b'shalom, al mishkavo, v'nomar amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the soul of Erwin Pollack, who has gone to his other home in you. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace, and may his soul continue to be bound up in the bond of the souls in this world in life. And may he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. As I recite the Mourner's Kaddish, I'm going to shift to gallery view for those who are comfortable standing and rising for the Kaddish. Give us a sense of community. Yitgadal v'yidkadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
V'yalma divra kirute v'yamlich malchute. V'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael. Ba'agala uvizman kari v'imru. Amen.
Amen.
Yehe shmei Rabbah mevarach v'yalam olamei omayim. Yiparach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei d'kudisha brichu. La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran bi'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehe shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru.
Amen.
It's my honor to turn the service back over to Adira for a little bit more of an interlude.
I have one more song to play.
It's still, I mean, it's a good implement.
Probably invented before dishwasher.
A private burial will take place following this service in just a little bit. But then later today, there will be a Shiva gathering by Zoom from 6:30 to 7:30. And if you need the link, you can email me at ravnadav@bethisrael-aa.org, or you can ask the family, or on our website at bethisrael-aa.org, you can see a link for the evening service, and it will be that link. Go ahead.
Excuse me, the Shiva is tomorrow and Thursday, Wednesday and Thursday, 6:30 to 7:30. And we'll send Eastern time. Yes. Sorry about that.
No, thank you for clarifying. And so that will be the time for Shiva, and people are invited to come and spend time with the family and share memories and condolences and support for them. At this time, we've saved a few minutes for people who may not be able to attend one of the Shivas and who would like to share a brief tribute to Erwin or a memory of condolence to the family at this time. So what I'll do is, and this can get a little tricky technologically, but it's worth a try. So I'm going to put people on gallery view. With so many people, I still can't see everybody. But if you would like to offer a brief tribute at this time before burial, then I ask you to unmute yourself, because that's the easiest way for me to see you. And then I'll let you know if you can spend some time. I will never say no to Helen Amanoff. So Helen, would you speak at this time?
Yes, I would like to say that Erwin was a fantastic, caring gentleman who used to meet regularly on Saturday morning services, and we would always gravitate together. And when his daughter came, we sat together always at the Kiddush. He always never failed to ask about David and how he was. Of course, David and he were pretty much the same age. So David just celebrated his 95th birthday. and we treasured his friendship. He was a wonderful, wonderful person. I always asked after Marcel, and he always asked after my David. We had things to share in common with each other.
Thank you so much, Helen. And I'm looking, is there anyone, if you wish to speak, remember, I won't see your hand, so just unmute yourself and that'll be my signal.
May I just add that I'd like to convey my heartfelt condolences and sympathy to the whole family, to Marcel, to the children, to everybody. Wishing you all long life.
Thank you.
Helen, thank you. Helen, we couldn't say it better ourselves. Thank you for representing Beth Israel with that tribute.
Okay, I'd like to jump in for one moment.
Ron Sussman.
We heard all these wonderful stories about him as an educational source, an emotional source, but I got to tell you, up through maybe just a couple of years ago, we have this partition between the sanctuary and the social hall.
It was your physical source.
And it took a number of us to, at the end of services, either to open it or to close it. And every single Shabbat, who would leap out of his seat and pull these massive doors from either open them or close them, it just blew me away. And we're talking only about maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, that he would leap out of his seat. So it's emotional, educational, but his physical presence was something very special at Beth Israel.
No.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you. I witnessed that. Thank you. Him doing that.
And I'm still, and we'll take just, we'll see if anybody else is going to unmute themselves at this time. You're welcome to. Go ahead, Roger.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Thank you for this lovely service. Doubtless, many at this service know the whole family. Certain others of us know just one member of Dr. Pollack's wonderful family. In our case, the Crum family, it is our long standing relationship with and deep affection for Stanley. The Crum family extends, however, its condolences to the entire Pollack extended family and even wider assemblage of loving friends. And what I would say is that the marvel of this truly great man is that even at this moment of his death and his Kaddish, that he has created a community of family for us all to know the greatness that he and his loving wife created for the whole family and for all of us who mourn him in this moment. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Much love to you. Much love to Irene. Thank you and your whole family.
Maybe I'll say a few words.
Go ahead, Liz.
When Irv was one of my professors when I was a graduate student in psychology, and he was very tough. I remember studying for his exams. And then many years later, I switched fields out of psychology and I got a PhD in Bible. And lo and behold, Irv was one of my students when I was teaching Bible at the Emeritus program through Washtenaw. So it was fabulous having him, reversing roles like that and having him as my student.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Thank you, Liz. I know I speak for many of us by saying that as sad as it is not to be all in person, there's a beauty of seeing so many people who might not have otherwise been able to attend, be able to be together in this way and to pay tribute. I'm looking to see if anyone else wants to unmute themselves at this time.
Yeah, I don't know if they're still there, but I see Ed, but my dad had two first cousins, Ed Bymel, who's with us from California, and Steve Bymel, who's with us from Kyoto, Japan. And that speaks to what you were just saying about people being able to come a long distance just through Zoom. I know Steve was there earlier. I don't know if he's still there.
Thank everybody for joining us.
And so that explains the Japanese on my screen. So thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
And thanks to everybody for joining us. And we really do appreciate your love and support.
Yes, we're overwhelmed. And please come join us for the Shiva on either Wednesday or Thursday. And you can share some stories or just, allow some interaction, and we would enjoy that.
And thank you, Rabbi.
Yes.
Thank you
very much, Rabbi Kane.
It's a pleasure. And of course, and I'm so glad Rabbi Doberson will be with you for the burial. I just want to say that we've heard a lot about how much Erwin loved, but I think that what many of us who got to witness today saw is how much he was loved. And that was very, very palpable by all of you.
Thank you.
Just to let people know, this has been recorded. It's automatic on YouTube, and it'll be on the Beth Israel Congregation of Ann Arbor channel. If anyone searches Beth Israel Congregation Ann Arbor, you'll find us. So if you know anyone who couldn't be with us, they can experience this asynchronously. I imagine Erwin might say I used that word wrong, but I hope it's correct. So that, and they can find it there. It'll be archived shortly. It usually takes about an hour. With that, I wish everyone to go in peace, and we look forward to seeing people join us at the Shiva.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks. So there's my quick. Here, I'm going to go through and get others so you can see.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, there's Juliet.
Juliet.
Yeah. There's Tyler. Yeah.
Do they hear us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's good to see you all. It's good to see you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
No, there's Seth.
Rachel.
Hi, Seth.
Hey, Seth.
Love you guys.
Love you.
Love you too.
Okay.